I'm Rohit Sharma and welcome to Desi from DC, coming to you every night from heart of Washington. This is where America's power corridor meet India's prime time to break down the political, economic, and global stories that shape both nations live from Washington, DC. From Capitol Hill to Raisana Hill, we connect the dots between what happens here in Washington and how it echoes back home in India. We begin tonight with the big stories of the day. Epstein Island photos spark a new outrage. Indian-American comic explains Trump appeal. Indian rupee crashes past 90 mark. Tariffs possible even after court loss. And Putin and Witkoff talks productive but no deal. Tonight, jaw-dropping new evidence in long-running investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Lawmakers today released for the first time photos and videos taken inside Epstein's private Caribbean island. The images paint a chilling portrait of secrecy, wealth, and what many believe was unspeakable abuse. The House Oversight Committee today unveiled a batch of never-before-seen images and videos from Epstein's secluded estate in U.S. Virgin Islands. The visuals show luxurious bedroom, a library or office, hallways, and what appears to be a room with a dentist chair, complete with masks and surgical-style gear hanging on the wall. In another startling frame, a chalkboard bears ominous words: power, deception, time, and music. Some entries are redacted, suggesting that names or other details may have been scrubbed. Committee members say the release comes ahead of the looming December 19 deadline, when allies of Epstein expect the Justice Department to publicly release files tied to the case under the recently passed Epstein Files Transparency Act. They also note that they have obtained banking records from institutions like JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank, which could shed light on the financial network behind Epstein's operations. In a statement, Oversight Committee's ranking member said, "These images are disturbing and present a look into the world of Jeffrey Epstein and his island. We release them for transparency until justice is delivered for the survivors." Secretary of State Marco Rubio sparked renewed debate yesterday with comments warning of a heightened threat from Islamic radicalization among immigrants arriving and living in the United States. Speaking on Fox News, Rubio emphasized that while some immigrants may have no prior history of extremism, many come from cultures and regions where Islamist terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda actively seek to radicalize vulnerable individuals. Take a look.
Ultimately, all radical Islamic movements in the world identify the West writ large, but the United States in particular, as the greatest evil on the earth. And every chance to have the notion that somehow radical Islam would be comfortable with simply controlling some province in Iraq or Syria is just not borne out by history. Radical Islam has shown that their desire is not simply to occupy one part of the world and be happy with their own little caliphate. They want to expand. It's revolutionary in its nature. It seeks to expand and control more territories and more people. And radical Islam has designs openly on the West, on the United States, on Europe. We've seen that progress there as well. And they are prepared to conduct acts of terrorism. In the case of Iran, nation-state actions, assassinations, murders, you name it, whatever it takes for them to gain their influence and ultimately their domination of different cultures and societies. That's a clear and imminent threat to the world and to the broader West, but especially to the United States, who they identify as the chief source of evil on the planet. Okay, the reason why they hate the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the leadership of the UAE, of Bahrain, is because they've allowed the United States to partner with them. That's why they hate them. They consider them infidels for it. They hate Israel. But they also hate America, and they hate anywhere in the world that we have influence. They seek to attack it, including here in the homeland. If you look at the domestic terrorists, at the attacks that have happened here domestically, the overwhelming majority of them have been inspired by radical Islamic viewpoints. And that includes the shooting in the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. That includes the Saudi pilot in Pensacola, my home state, 2 attacks.
He specifically referenced Arabic language propaganda by Islamist extremist groups targeting immigrants from Muslim-majority countries. Rubio argued that this vulnerability increases the risk of radicalization among these populations compared to others. I do think it is a higher threat among people that come from cultures and backgrounds that make it harder for them to assimilate once they get into the United States, and that make them vulnerable to Arabic language, for example, propaganda by ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any of these other groups that are looking to radicalize people. Rubio further warned that admitting large numbers of people from regions with active terrorist movements carries unavoidable risks, including the possibility that some will become criminals or terrorists inside the US. The bottom line is, there is no effective way to allow hundreds of thousands of people to enter any country in the world and not face consequences. You take 100,000 people from anywhere in the world, and you're going to have some percentage of them that turn out to be bad. Now, these were Rubio's remarks, which directly linked immigration from Muslim-majority countries with a heightened risk of Islamist radicalization, fueling ongoing tensions over immigration policy and national security. Some critics warn such statements risk stigmatizing entire religious communities and undermining efforts at inclusion. While supporters argue Rubio is raising a vital security concern that demands serious attention. The Indian rupee has crashed through a psychological barrier, sliding past 90 per US dollar to hit a record low on Wednesday, its sixth consecutive day of losses. The rupee is now Asia's worst performing currency this year, down over 5% and on track for its steepest annual decline since 2022. Trump punitive tariffs and vanishing foreign investment are crushing India's currency. And this is why New Delhi's top economists say that he is not losing sleep over it. The rupee hit a record low of 90.29 per dollar before closing at 90.19, down nearly 0.4% on the same day. The slide underscores a stark divergence. While India's GDP growth has been stronger than expected, punitive US tariffs and weak capital flows have piled relentless pressure on the currency. Foreign investors have pulled about $17 billion from Indian equities this year, while foreign direct investment and overseas commercial borrowings have remained soft. India's trade deficit hit a record $40+ billion in October, and HDFC Bank expects the current account deficit to rise close to 1.1% of GDP this financial year. India's chief economic advisor V. Anant Nageshwaran struck a confident tone at an event on Wednesday, saying, "I'm not losing sleep over it." He claimed the weakness has had no impact on inflation and expects the currency to recover in 2026. But traders and economists are not buying it. They say every day without a US-India trade deal means more foreign exchange demand from the trade deficit, while foreign capital supply remains thin and inconsistent. Joey Chu, head of Asia FX research at HSBC, explained, "Foreign investors are losing patience. We had 1 month of net inflows in October, but without trade deal headlines since then, net flows have become flat. The situation is compounded by signs of speculative activity. The 1 month dollar rupee non-deliverable forward points jumped to 7-month high, surging nearly 50% in just 3 days. Speculators are betting the rupee's downward momentum will continue, emboldened by RBI's relatively light touch intervention and reluctance to force the dollar rupee back down." HDFC Bank's Sakshi Gupta expects the rupee to hover into the 92 to 93 range next quarter, warning, "The longer it takes for a trade deal to come, the longer the pressure on the rupee is likely to persist." Portfolio manager Sad Dora from Janus Henderson Investor was even blunter. "The weak macro picture in India makes weak currency performance inevitable. Rising trade deficits, weakening nominal GDP growth, weak FDI, and foreigners selling down domestic equities." India's benchmark Nifty 50 closed down 0.2% Wednesday, while the 10-year bond yield nudged up to 6.53%. Investors and bankers say any relief depends entirely on breakthrough in US-India trade negotiations, which have been stalled for months. As importers rush to hedge against further rupee weakness and speculators pile on, the question isn't whether the rupee will weaken further. It is how far it will fall before New Delhi is forced to take action. For now, India's economic policymakers are projecting calm. But with the rupee on track for its worst year since 2022 and no trade deal in sight, that confidence may soon be tested. Trump's tariffs were supposed to bring manufacturing jobs roaring back into America. Instead, they are triggering layoffs. Since April, US manufacturing has shed tens of thousands of jobs as rising input cost, tariff uncertainty, and shrinking demand force companies to make brutal choices: absorb losses, raise prices, or cut workers. They are choosing cuts. Small businesses lost 52,000 private sector jobs in November alone. Factory output is stagnating, and economists warn 2026 could be when firms start slashing payrolls in earnest and not hiring. The promise of reshoring production is colliding with reality: elevated cost, weak demand, and automation that's cheaper than labor. What was sold as revitalizing American industry is becoming a pressure test for millions of workers whose livelihoods depend on stable employment. The tariff gamble may be backfiring, and 2026 could very well prove it. Our report examines who pays the price. As new US tariffs begin to bite, signs are emerging that the economic pain may not be temporary, and 2026 could bring serious fallout for American workers. Tariffs were introduced with a promise: bring manufacturing back and jobs back to America, protect domestic industry, and reduce dependence on global supply chains. But today, that promise looks increasingly hollow. According to recent analysis, widespread layoffs have already begun. Since April, US manufacturing alone has lost tens of thousands of jobs. A wave of cuts that experts link directly to rising input costs, tariff-related uncertainty, and shrinking demand. What's worse, the warning signs point to 2026 as the moment many firms may begin slashing payrolls in earnest, not hiring. Output in factories is stagnating. In the most recent quarterly reports, manufacturing output barely budged, and in many subsectors, contraction continues. At the same time, small businesses, long considered as the backbone of American employment, are shedding more jobs than they add. Recent payroll data shows a loss of 32,000 private sector jobs in November alone, as cost pressures and uncertain demand weigh on hiring decisions. Economists warn that this may not be a short-term slump. Once tariff raised costs for raw materials and imported components, companies face tough choice: absorb losses, pass higher prices onto consumers, or cut labor. That dynamic could hold back hiring for months or even years. For many Americans, especially those in manufacturing, retail, and trade-dependent sectors, the risks are real. Wages may stagnate, job opportunities may shrink, and for younger or lower-skilled workers, finding stable employment may soon be harder than it's been in years. There's also a bigger question: can the push to reshore production survive when costs stay elevated, demand weakens, and automation becomes cheaper than labor? Many supply chain executives and economists say that the odds are against it. What was sold as a policy to revitalize American industry is becoming a pressure test for the broader labor market, a test that may reshape hiring, wages, and job security for millions. As 2026 approaches, the stakes could get very real, not just for factory workers and retailers, but for any American whose livelihood depends on stable employment and a functioning economy. Indian-American comedian Zarna Garg is sparking conversation about why President Trump resonates with parts of her community, the Indian diaspora in America, despite his controversial policies. In a candid interview on the Daily Beast podcast, she explained that frustration with the Biden-era immigration chaos drove many legal Indian immigrants towards Trump. Our story tonight: how the comedian who started performing on a whim is now explaining a political shift that has Democrats worried about losing their most reliable Asian American voting bloc. Garg was born in India and immigrated legally to the US. She told the host Joanna Coles that the Indian community's support for Trump stems from deep frustration with illegal immigration. She Goes on to explain that Indian people, by and large, are legal immigrants in America, which means it was years of waiting, years of paperwork, hundreds and thousands of verification. She explains that we've got relatives who've been waiting 15 years in line because that's the right thing to do. And then it felt like anybody who was breaking the law was getting rewarded. Garg started her comedy in 2019 when her daughter Zoya forced her into first open mic at New York City, and she's been brutally honest ever since. Garg was quick to clarify she doesn't agree with Trump's execution on immigration policy, saying, "I have a problem with his execution, but a lot of the problems he has highlighted are real problems, and just saying the problem does not exist is not going to make them go away." Her daughter Zoya, who appeared on the podcast with her mom, added that Trump appeals to Indian as a business person. This is something that Indian people can understand and aspire to in their own families constantly. The numbers back up Garg's observation. A Carnegie Endowment survey from October 2024 found that Indian Americans identifying as Democrats dropped from 56% in 2020 to 47% in 2024, while independents surged. Garg explains she often encounters Europeans who love criticizing Trump but still question US border policy. They are right for a lot of it, but they all were like, "What is going on with your border? You cannot just walk into Switzerland, you cannot just walk into Canada, you cannot just walk into India." Then Garg dropped what she called a hot take. The Indian community loves Trump. It is what it is. We don't have problems with him that a lot of people in America have. When asked why, she laughed and cracked a joke that all politicians back home in India are crooked. So that just seems to be a job requirement. Her daughter cracked up beside her. "It's a vintage," Garg said. "Brutally honest, politically incorrect, and speaking truths many Indian Americans think but won't say publicly." In July, Garg told Fox News Digital about her unlikely comedy career. "This is a country that looks at a person like me and says, 'We want to hear what you have to say. That's what makes America.'" She said her career wouldn't be possible if she was in India. Pop star Sabrina Carpenter is furious after the Trump administration used her hit Juno in an ICE immigration raid video, calling it ill and disgusting. The White House fired back by quoting her own lyrics. The question is, when did pop songs become government propaganda tools? Let's have a look at this video. And that wraps up tonight's edition of Desi from DC. This is Zoid Sharma for India Today and India Today Global. And if you're watching us on India Today Global, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button before you leave. Stay tuned, stay informed, and as always, stay curious. Goodbye.